Hello.
Hey, Rabbi.
We'll give people a minute or so.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we're still in our middle of our interesting reality. So
It's okay. It's all real, so it's okay.
I know, right? I know, right?
Yeah.
So today was supposed to be the last day of our kids' quarantine. So we had to test them so that they can go back. And two of them tested positive.
Oh my.
So I mean, they're thank God they're all fine, but it's all good.
Yeah.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hey, how you doing?
Okay, thank you. We missed you for 3 weeks.
Yeah, I know. But we're back. We're back. It's my kids have basically been home forever, and that's what it feels like.
Yeah, that happens.
Yep. And they're not going back yet, so it should be fun. Yeah. Thank God. Okay, it's 8:31. If more people join us, wonderful. We're gonna get started. I don't know how long tonight's share is going to be. Tonight is going to be a little bit of getting some of the background stable, and hopefully tonight will be a little bit more interactive than normal. Partially because I want to try and flesh out a little bit from your perspective, kind of where you would start to think about some of these things, because I realize the topic of Shmitta is a topic that us Americans, we don't know that much about. You go to Israel, everyone has an opinion about everything. You go to come to America, most people are like, stay away from Shmitta stuff, right? The peppers are from Israel, that's about what our knowledge base is, I feel like. And so trying to get into what is behind and how do you factor and what are some of the basics for us when we make our way to Kroger and find stuff is I think it's an important just thing to work through. So let's start through. We're going to finish kind of the first section is a complete section. It's not a long section, but it's a complete section of the source sheet. And then we're going to do a medium-sized Gemara that is very important for our topic moving forward. There we go. Okay. And I apologize. I have not had time to sit down and translate a lot of the sources. A lot of these sources are not available in English. So you'll have to bear with me a little bit. So the first topic is I titled it, right, why it shouldn't be there in a Shemitah year. And the truth is that really it's actually, I feel like in a Shemitah year we're more, let me just take a step back. Shemitah, again, every 7 years we let the land of Israel lay fallow. We don't work the land. The things that grow by themselves during the year of Shemitah, in theory, should be totally okay to eat, but you cannot do business with them. But that only really holds true for things that naturally grow year after year, like fruit. Things that don't grow naturally, if they happen to grow, the rabbi said, well, we don't want to eat that. It's fichem. We don't want to eat it because maybe somebody violated Shemitah, planted it, and that's why it grew. And so we're a little bit more strict on certain types of products. Now, there's actually a big debate whether according to the Ramban, and this is like a little known Ramban, we're not going to see this inside, so I'll just mention it at the front. The Ramban actually says there's a mitzvah to eat peiros shmita, right? That there's a mitzvah to eat the produce that does grow by itself on Shmita, which is really fascinating because we normally don't think about that. But there's also I don't think it's well known, but it's pretty black on white in the Mishnayos. There's a prohibition of taking Shmita out of the land of Israel, Shmita produce. And so whenever you find stuff in America that should be a Shmita product, you scratch your head a little bit. And there are a couple of interesting exceptions that maybe we'll talk about in the future, right? I mean, I'm sure on right next year, I'm sure many of the etrogim that people will be using in the States will be etrogim that come from Israel. and that is complicated, but we'll have to talk about that when we get there. But the Mishnah in Shvius, the sixth parak, the fifth Mishnah says, "Ein motzian shemen sreifa upero Shvius me'eretz l'chutz la'aretz." You're not supposed to remove or take out. Shemen sreifa is oil that has to be burned for korban-related reasons, or peros Shvius, or the fruit of Shmitta from Israel to chutz la'aretz. Amar Rabbi Shimon, Shabati b'perish shemotzian l'Surya ve'ein motzian l'chutz la'aretz. Right, and so Rabbi Shimon adds a little niche, which we're not going to get into too deeply, but basically that Surya is a part of Eretz Yisrael was not part of the original kivush, not part of the original acquisitions of Israel. It was added later. And so it has this quasi-Israel, quasi-not Israel status in Halacha. And so the point that Rabbi Shimon is saying is that he knows that it's okay to take Shmita produce from Israel, which is for sure Israel, to Syria, which is maybe Israel. Okay, so that's this one little add-on, but the black on white, very clear Halacha, Mishnah and Shvius, Vav Hey 6.5 says you're not supposed to take out the fruit of Shvius, the fruit of the seventh year, out of Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz. Now, the Reisman Bior, so the Reisman is this fairly new commentary on the Mishnah. It often goes through the Bartanura and Rishonim and synthesizes a lot of the information. It's a really, really nice parish. I recently bought the set in an effort to start learning Mishnah Yomi with my son. And so I've been enjoying it. And so I used the Mishnah for Maseches Shvius, and the Reisman says as follows. So why can't you take the fruit of the produce of Shmita outside of Israel? Humishum chovas bior. This is because of the obligation to destroy the produce of Shmita at a certain juncture. When's that juncture? So he explains, so the rule is that you can eat the peros, again, like I said, you can eat the fruit or vegetables that naturally grow year after year, mostly fruit, that grow year after year. You can eat those things that grow on Shmita by themselves. However, if at some point there are no longer, let's say you look outside and the orchard is now being cleared of all oranges. There's no longer any oranges in the orchard. You have to clear out all oranges that you have from the orchard from your house. At that point, you're no longer able to have them in your home. That's called the chovas bior, right? Because the whole concept of Shmita is that the whole land is not owned by anybody, so you don't have control. So once there's no longer offerings to everybody else to eat from those oranges, you have to give up the ownership of the oranges that you have, right? When that product, that type is no longer found in the field, you have to take it out of your rishos and be mafkir and make it ownerless. So mitzvah bior tzricha is kind of davka b'Eretz Yisrael, and the rule is that in order to fulfill this mitzvah of bior, of removing this stuff from your house, can only be done in Israel. Lachain, therefore, if you take these products out of Israel and bring them to America, no one's going to have any clue in America at what point the chovas bior starts, what point the chovas bior kicks in, when you have to get rid of the products from your house. And so it's a dangerous thing to be sending it outside of the land of Israel because it's unlikely that it's going to be done properly. Therefore, or maybe not unlikely, but right, the language here is dafka, it has to be done in Eretz Yisrael. So even with even if you had the information, it might not be good, right? Even if you have a little video camera that's video cameraing the whole entire orchard, and you know for sure when the oranges, still bior can only be done in Israel, and therefore you're basically setting this person up to be in a problematic situation. Therefore, they made a rabbinic injunction not allowing the produce of Shmita to leave Israel. Even if it's before this man bior, right? Even if it's well before the orchard's going to be dry of new fruit. Number two, the yesh beforshim sha'isr lahotzi perush shvius lechutz la'aretz eino kashur lechovas bior. There's some who say no. The prohibition here is nothing to do with the rule or the idea of bior. Ella shegazru ken chachamim mechashash shemi yichshavu b'taus Jew pairs chutzaretz, because us Jews outside of Israel, we don't pay attention, right? We go to Kroger. I mean, if someone didn't tell me that the 6-pack of peppers is from Israel, a lot of them say from Israel, I would have never looked. I look for hashkacha, right? I look for different things, but I'm not looking where they make the different products. That's not something that I'm used to paying attention to. Again, during Shmitta, it's a good thing to pay attention to on certain products, but the reality is it's not something that I know I do, and I'm sure there are people across the Jewish community in America and everywhere else outside of Israel who are not paying close attention to where products are being made. Yes, if they're called Jaffa oranges, okay, it's a little bit of a giveaway. But a lot of things don't have, right, a place adjective to describe, right, the fruit. So you don't really know where it comes from, or vegetable. You're not really paying attention. And therefore, people are not going to know how to properly treat said produce, right? And that would be a problem. And so for these two reasons, says the Reisman, the Mishnah in Shvius says that one is not supposed to send products of Eretz Yisrael that are Shmita products outside of the land of Israel. Similarly, the Tosefta in Masechah Shvius, right, says, this is 5:1, Peiros Shvius Shiyatza Chutz La'aretz Mevaran Bimkoman. So the fruit of Shmita that leave to Chutz La'aretz, you can do bior in their place, right? So this is against the first answer of the Reisman, right? So the Tanakam, this is Divrei Rabbi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says that you in fact can do bior outside of the land of Israel. The second view of Rav Shimon ben Elazar says, Mevi'in la'aretz and mevaran ba'aretz. You should bring these fruits back to Israel, and you should actually do bior. You should actually get rid of them in Eretz Yisrael. Shenamar be'artzecha tiyeh kol tevuata le'echol. In your land, all of these things should be available to eat, meaning they should be in your land, and that's where the chovas bior kicks in, right? So however, the Reisman actually in a later footnote points out that this Tosefta is building a case of what we would call bidi avad, after the fact, right? If the produce is already leaving Israel, is already left Israel, you find it on the shelves in Kroger, so now what? Can you do bior in Chutz La'aretz when it was taken out of Israel? Maybe, right? You would say, okay, you shouldn't take it out because bior is supposed to be done in Israel, but if you already did it, then maybe there is room to do bior in outside of Eretz Yisrael, or not. And so again, interesting debate here. It just highlights again, there's this problem of taking fruit and vegetables out of the land of Israel during a Shemitah year. Now, I want to highlight that there really is a whole host of halachot, in addition to Shmita, that we don't really pay attention to. And these halachot are going to be instrumental for us in the next section, which we're going to be starting now. Now, I want to ask the following question to everyone who's on. And so feel free to unmute yourself if you want to pipe in. If I ask you to define what does it mean for something to be Peiros Shvius, right? The produce of the seventh year. How would you quantify what that means?
In Israel, on land owned by a Jew.
Okay, in Israel, on land owned by a Jew. Good, that's going to be part. That's definitely a part of it. So, what about start dates and end dates?
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask. Is it when it's harvested, when it's planted, when it's tended, when it's weeded? What constitutes the timing?
Exactly, right? Meaning when you think about it, right, trying to define at what point a produce gets the title produce of Shmita is complicated because, and again, the year for Shmita starts at Rosh Hashanah. and ends with Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so the year, that's the year, right? So that's their tax season, right? It's Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Now, what has to happen, right, between Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah in that seventh year for the produce to be considered Shemitah produce? And unfortunately, it's not surprising, but it is unfortunate for clarity's sake. The answer is not going to be singular across different products, which is going to be somewhat maddening in terms of our ability to give a very simple, straightforward answer to that question. Not only that, but the truth is that the poskim spend a lot of time analyzing many other, I would say, I guess, fiscal years to try to figure out how do you navigate this idea. And what I mean is, and this is what I was saying before, is that Trumos and Maestros, which are tithes of different sorts that we give to Kohanim and Leviim and to the poor, and we eat in Yerushalayim, these things are dependent upon the year. In the same way that you pay taxes on the fiscal year, right? The money that you make from point A to point B, right? So too, when you give Meiser or Truma, so Truma is about 2% of your produce, then you give another 10%. So 2% goes to the Kohen, about 10% goes to the Levi, and then another small amount has a cycle. I once heard it dubbed the duck, duck, goose cycle. It was very helpful to remember, which is there's a 6-year cycle followed by Shmitta. So duck, duck, goose, duck, duck, goose. So the first 2 and the 4th and the 5th years is Meiser Sheni, where the secondary tithe that you take from your produce is taken, you either transfer it to a coin and bring that coin to Jerusalem and then buy produce in Jerusalem, or you bring that produce to Jerusalem and eat the produce in Jerusalem. That was the Meiser Sheni. And then you have on the goose years, right? So year 3 and 6, it's called Meiser Ani. It is the tithe that goes to the poor. And so again, that knowing what year the produce was considered is of fundamental importance when you're trying to actually figure out how much do I owe, right? How much Truma should I be giving? How much Meiser should I be giving? How much Meiser Sheni should I be giving? Is it Meiser Sheni this year or Meiser Ani this year? Knowing what year is super important. And what we're going to find is that there's going to be overlap and not overlap between various categories. And so what I want to do for tonight is really just lay the groundwork. I want to lay the groundwork to try to help us have the resources necessary for us moving forward to start thinking about which products fit into which categories. And we're going to start with one Gemara that spans a couple of pages. I kind of nipped and tucked to make it a little bit easier for us. But the Gemara is mostly on Sukkah Mem Amid Aleph, the 40A. But the Mishnah and some other stuff happens a little bit before that. So this Gemara, Mishnah/Gemara, is talking about buying etrogim for on a Shemitah year, right? So again, one of the rules of produce of Shemitah is that you're not allowed to buy and sell it. So the Mishnah is asking, what do you do in Israel when you're trying to buy an esrog and it's a Shemitah year? So I can't buy it. So what do I do? So says the Mishnah, Halokeach lulav mechavero b'shvius. Someone who's buying a lulav from his friend on the 7th year, no sein lo etrog b'matana. So you should give him the etrog. Right, this year, lulavim are really expensive. Right? And by the way, I have a wonderful citron gift for you that goes for free with this lulav. Right? And so the way that the Mishnah describes how you sell lulav and esrog to a person on the year of Shmita is, well, you sell them a lulav and you give them an etrog. So we're going to see that the Gemara is going to try and figure out, so why is it a problem for the etrog, not a problem for the lulav? Where do we draw the lines on certain things? So no sin etrog b'matan. Lefisha ein rashai little kocho b'shvius, because you can't buy it. You can't buy the etrog on a Shmita year. So says the Gemara, ihachi lulav nami. If you can't buy an etrog, why can you buy a lulav? So says the Gemara, oh, don't worry. Lulav barshishis hanichnas l'shvius he. The lulav started growing in the 6th year, went into the 7th year, was harvested in the 7th year, but because it is already kind of grown in the 6th year, therefore, therefore you can buy the lulav, and the etrog you just get as a tag along. Says the Gemara, ihachi etrog nami bas shishis anechneses l'shviasi. So then, why don't you just do the same thing? You just harvest all of your etrogim, right before Sukkot. It's fine because most of the growing happened before Sukkot, right before Rosh Hashanah, right? So have the same thing. Why not just harvest your etrog? Doesn't matter right before Sukkot, and it's not a big deal because most of the growing took place in the 6th year. Says the Gemara, etrog basar likita azlinan. When it comes to an etrog, we follow the likita, which is the harvesting, the picking. When you pick the etrog, that is when its designation. Oh, okay. I need to go grab my plug before my computer dies. Sorry about that. Give me 2 seconds. Okay, sorry about that. So the Gemara's conclusion at this stage is that a etrog follows the lakita, follows the harvesting when it's picked. That's when it gets its designation as a Shmitta product. Veha bein Rabban Gamliel, bein Rabbi Eliezer. And so the Gemara is going to ask a whole host of questions against this, and it's going to give one of those somewhat unsatisfactory answers about how the text of the initial question was actually based off of an erroneous text. So it's a little bit of a hard back and forth, but follow along as best as you can. So again, conclusion number 1 is that an etrog follows when it's picked. That's when it gets its designation of Shmita product or not Shmita product. So if, let's say, you pick your etrog on the 28th day of Elul, right before a couple of days before Rosh Hashanah, then it's not a Shmita etrog if Shmita starts that next year. If it is a Shmita year, right, then you pick it right before. And if the previous year was a Shmita year, so then you have a lot of work to do during the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, right? So you're doing a lot of picking of etrogim during that time period so that you avoided the previous year of Shmita. Anyways, when you're exporting, though, etrogim next year to America, for us this coming year, is a lot of the etrogim that we'll get, in theory, will be from Israel. So again, we'll talk about that in the future. V'ha bein Rabban Gamliel, bein Rabbi Eliezer, le'inyan shvius etrog basar chanata azlina. But didn't we say that both Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer are of the opinion that an etrog follows the chanata, which is basically when it first starts to take form, right? Right when the flower falls off of the tree and the fruit just starts to form itself, that is called chanata. That is this moment when a fruit or vegetable, or really, I guess, a fruit gets its designation as a Shmita or not Shmita produce. So in other words, if, let's say, a etrog first starts to flower in the year of Shmita, it's a Shmita etrog no matter when it's picked. And the reverse is true also. If a etrog starts to take form before Shmita year, even if it's picked on the Shmita year, it's not going to have a designation as a Shmita etrog. Ditnan, as we learned in the Mishnah, proving the point of Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar, Etrog shavel ilan bishlosha drachim. An etrog follows the same rules as a tree in three matters. Uli yerek b'derech echad, and it's more similar to a vegetable in one way. Shavel ilan bishlosha drachim. So what are the three ways that it's similar to a tree? Leorla, leravai, ulishvius. So orla is the prohibition of using a tree for 3 years. So that's similar to a etrog tree. You cannot use an etrog tree for the first 3 years. The concept of netaravai is that in the 4th year, there's a special set of halachot that apply to trees, also apply to an etrog tree. Neither of these are our topics, so I'm glossing over them. And the third category is the shvius, that in the same way that a tree follows chanata, follows the first time that its fruit shows signs of becoming an actual fruit. Similarly, same is true by the etrog. It's similar to a vegetable in one way. What's that one way? Shebishas likitato ishuro. That when it comes to meiser, it follows the time that you pick it. So in etrog, in terms of doing maser, in terms of doing trumas and maestros on the etrogim, how many are given to a kohen, how many are given to a levi, how many are given to a ani or taken to your Jerusalem and sold, and the money is used to buy food in Jerusalem to eat. That calculation is based off of when you pick the etrog. The calculation of what etrog is considered part of Shmitta is based off of when the etrog first started to be formed. Okay, so all of a sudden you have different fiscal years, so to speak, even for the etrog itself. Forgetting various different types of or categories of fruits and vegetables, in the etrog itself, for meiser versus for shmita, you have two different ways that you're supposed to keep track of which etrogim fit into which category. And I imagine, I'm not a farmer, but I imagine this is not easy to track, right? I mean, you have to keep track of every etrog. That's pretty crazy when you start to think about it. Divrei, meaning it makes a lot more sense to follow the time of you picking, right? When you at the moment of picking, it's much easier to keep track of. If you have to keep track of when things first started to bud, I mean, that's a headache. I cannot imagine that being a very easy process. Again, probably easier now with all the technology that we have, but wow, I don't want to think about that. So this is the words of Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Elazar Omer, etrog shavel ilan mechol davar. Right, so Rabbi Elazar says that an etrog follows the same rules as a tree in all matters, meaning even in meiser, it follows the chanata, it follows the initial budding, and not the zman lakita, not the time of picking. So the point of this whole long conversation is that both Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar disagree with what the statement of the Gemara. The Gemara said that an etrog follows lakita, follows when it's picked, but Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar in their Mishnayos, these are Tanaim, so this is why it's a question on this Gemara, because they're an earlier source. They all agree against this, that actually it follows the time of initial forming. Okay, so says the Gemara, Hada Amar I Haitatna Ditanya Amar Yosi of Tulmus Hayed Mishum Chamisha Zakanim. So of Tulmas testified in front of 5 elders. Etrog achar lekitel meiser. That first of all, an etrog follows the picking in the context of meiser, in the context of tithing. Again, this follows the view of Rabban Gamliel earlier. The Rabboseinu nimnu beusha, but when the Sanhedrin moved from Yavne, I think it may have had one other stop before Usha, but eventually they made their way to a city called Usha. So when while they were there, Amru bein lemaiser bein lishvius. So the rabbis there came to the conclusion that for an etrog, that an etrog followed lakita, followed the picking, both for meiser and for shvius. So there must have been some sort of mistake here when we say that Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar both said that it follows the chanata, follows the initial forming. Can't be, because the rabbis in Usha concluded that when it comes to Shmita, in fact, it follows the lakita, it follows the picking. Shvius mandechar shmei. Who mentioned Shmita? No, none of them mentioned Shmita. Right? None of these. Gamliel and never mentioned Shmita. So where did the Rabbanan of Usha start talking about Shmita? Chasurei mechsera. So there's missing text in this Mishnah. V'hachi ktani. This is what it's supposed to say. Etrog achar lekita lemaiser. And etrog goes after the picking. Goes after the when it's picked when it comes to tithing. And after the first forming when it comes to Shmita. And the rabbis in Usha got up and said, Etrog basar lakita bein lemaiser ben l'shvius. They disagreed with that Tanakama's view. They said, no. Really, both for Shmita and for Meiser, the Etrog follows the picking. Taima de lulav. Okay, so that's really all part one of this. And long story short, when it comes to Etrog, it's a little bit complicated. We'll see when we get to the actual modern day poskim. But for me, what I want to do right now is just use this as a model, right? It seems like there are two possibilities. We'll see there's a third possibility too in upcoming shiurim. But there are two possibilities right now, Chanata and Lakita. And these two possibilities are being debated within one product across two different fiscal years, the Meiser year and the Shemitah year, right? And we're not even sure, is the Etrog follow different paths for those two or the same path, i.e. Chanata, that we're still picking. So that's all an interesting debate in this Gemara, but for me, it provides us with an insight into the complexity that we're going to have to deal with when we deal with fruits versus vegetables, and then certain hybrid things like etrogim, which are kind of some of these funky cases that break some of the norms. Okay, so good. Second part of this also is interesting. So Taima de lulav bar shishis hanichnas l'shvius he. Right. So the reason that the Gemara originally gave as to why the lulav was not a problem of Shmita, of doing a work of schora, of doing business with it on Shmita, is because it did most of its growing in the 6th year. It was only picked in the 7th year, but it was already a not Shmita product because it did most of its growing in the 6th year. Says the Gemara, Hadavishis kadosh. Hadavshrius kadosh. The implication is that if it had done most of its growing in the 7th year, in fact, the lulav would have kedushas shvius, would have the holiness of Shemitah. Amai, but why would that be? Eitzim ba'almahu. A lulav is just wood. It's not a fruit, right? There's no Shemitah prohibition on wood. There's Shemitah prohibition on the fruit. Now, you still can't plant anything in the Shemitah year. You can't plant even a tree that doesn't produce fruit. You can't plant anything in a Shemitah year. But when it comes to Shemitah produce, the only thing that gets the Kedushas Shvius is food, or fruit, vegetables, etc. Ve'etzim ein bahem mishum Kedushas Shvius. The Tanya, we learned in a brisa, right? So that wood does not get the holiness of Shemitah. Al kanim v'al gufanim shegavavan lechova al pnei hasadeh. So when you have leaves of cane trees or leaves of olive vines, so if you collect them, so if you're collecting these things to eat, right? So you're gonna take your grape leaves and make those grape leaves wrapped in the rice wrapped in grape leaves. So you're going to pickle them and eat them. Okay, so that's a problem because you're going to eat them. So if you're collecting them for eating, that's a problem. Laktan le'etzim, but if you collected them to burn, ein bahem mishum kedusha shvius, there's no problem there of kedusha shvius. Therefore, we should say, if you're taking a lulav to shake to do the mitzvah, well, that's not eating. That's more like for making a fire. right? It's more like taking for kindling for a fire. So it should also be not problematic at all. Says the Gemara, Shiny Hasam to Amar Kra Lachem Leochla. When it comes to the produce of Shvius, it uses two languages. It says to you and to eat. So you might think originally it's only when it's only produce that you're going to eat, but then it also says that it's for you. So it sounds like any benefit that you're going to get from these things could become problematic. So the Gemara says, no. But because it gives you both of them, le'ochla limits the lachem. The word le'ochla for eating is going to limit in what way they are for you. How does it limit it? Lachem dumya de le'ochla. When it says that it's for you, it has to follow at least a rubric that is similar to the type of benefit you get when you eat. What does that mean? Mi shanasan ubiyoro shave. That's only when the benefit that you get and the destruction of the object happens at the same time. Yatsu eitzim shanasan achar biuran. So that excludes wood, where generally speaking, the hana, the benefit, happens after the destruction, meaning that the wood gets destroyed and that produces heat after the fact. After it gets destroyed, it produces the heat, and therefore the destruction and the benefit happen right after each other, as opposed to when you're eating food where you're already benefiting from the food while it's in your mouth and you're destroying it. And then as you digest it, yes, there's other benefits that will happen after the fact in terms of nutrients and other things. But the point is that the hana, the benefit, and the destruction happen at the same time. And so because of that, any type of problematic hana or benefit is going to have to follow that same rubric. So the Gemara says, "V'ha'ika eitim demashchan." What happens if you have wood that was covered in oil, meaning the goal of the wood was actually for light as opposed to for heat? So there, it's more similar to eating, because when you burn that, it's burning at the moment it produces light at the same time that it's being destroyed. So the nasan ubiran shavet, because there the hana and the destruction, the benefit and the destruction are happening simultaneously. So Amarava stam eitzim lahasaka hein omdim. Rabbi says you're right, but generally speaking, when it comes to wood, it's for kindling, for burning, not for light. And so therefore, when you're burning wood, in most cases, it's to produce warmth, which happens after the destruction of the wood, right? Particularly when the coals are created and the coals are then used for various things to cook. So long story short, the second half here is that what comes out of this conversation is that a lulav, and this is kind of bears out in Rashi, I didn't bring it here, but we'll just say it outside, is that a lulav, which is going to be used as for a mitzvah, actually might be a lulav, which is like wood. The benefit and its destruction are not happening. No, sorry, give me 1 second. I'm getting this wrong. So this is why this proves that a lulav is in fact problematic on Shmitta for the mitzvah, because when the mitzvah is done, the mitzvah is going to happen immediately, basically, when you take it. So it's, I'm thinking now, I'm not sure why it works 100%, because you're not destroying the lulav when you take it. But the point is that the hana'ah doesn't take place after it's destroyed. It takes place while it still exists. So it's not perfectly parallel, but because it's not destroyed first, it's parallel enough. And so because of that, taking the lulav is considered a problematic version of hana'ah, of something that is from Shmitta year. And therefore, in fact, even the lulav, if it is a 7th year lulav, could also be problematic from a Shmita perspective. Okay, we'll get there. We'll get there again when we deal more elaborately with the four species, which I plan on doing towards the end again. But the Etrog was just such a juicy Gemara, which is so helpful for us, I think, moving forward to try to have the basis. So let's just summarize what we got so far from the Gemara. Summarize and conclude, and then when we start next class, I will kind of recapitulate this again so that we have it as background when we start to dive into other categories of fruit and vegetables, so that when we start saying, oh, this is a Shmita, right, pepper, right, we'll know, is it actually a Shmita pepper? Or do we think it's a Shmita pepper, but it's actually not a Shmita pepper, right? And so trying to give us a better sense of kind of what the rules are. And you should know, in Israel, a lot of the Israelis have little charts. They have cheat sheets that they keep on there, and they also have, when it comes to, right, that conversation we had in the beginning about biur, a lot of different kashrus organizations in Israel put out like the biur schedule, like all the oranges are off the orchards by this date, and all are off by this date. So you have to get rid of all your things by now, and get rid of all your things by now. It's very interesting. They're very organized, and you kind of have to be in order for this to actually work. So let's again summarize and conclude, and then we'll build upon this foundation hopefully next week. So first topic that we dealt with tonight is why it's a little bit troubling when we find Shmita produce being sold in America, is that the truth is that we're not supposed to take produce of Shmita outside of Israel. Two possibilities why that is. Number one, there's this concept of biur, of having to make ownerless any fruit, that is no longer found in the wild, in the field. Once that fruit is no longer found in the wild, you cannot have that fruit from a Shmita year in your house. You have to get rid of it and again introduce it back into the wild. And so you can't do that outside of Israel. Number two is that the rabbis established that we don't want the produce of Shmita, which have certain halachot about kedusha and tara and tuma and tara, to be leaving Eretz Yisrael, where Jews are living right as best as they can, but they're not dealing with this stuff on a daily basis, and they're very prone to not know what they're supposed to do if they come across these types of products. And so we don't, or forget Jews, there's gonna be non-Jews going to buy this stuff too, right? I mean, the people are not going to be treating this stuff properly. And so we want to try to avoid that as best as possible. In the second conversation that we had tonight, we started the conversation of what makes something the produce of Shmita. And that's really, for me, like just getting the background of being able to figure that out. I think it's very helpful. We're not going to get too lost in the weeds. I want us to do some of the basic Gemaras so that we have a sense of where the Gemara is holding, but we're gonna try to streamline this process moving forward to pretty practical conversations. But again, you have different possibilities. Is it based off of when the produce first starts to develop? Is it based off of when the product is harvested, is taken off its growing source? Or is it some point in between those two, right? Maybe it's not the very beginning, maybe it's when, right, some degree of its growing took place, right? If you remember, the language of this Gemara even kind of alluded to this, that it said by the lulav, it said, right, it's a bar shishis hanichnas l'shvius. It's considered like the son of the 6th year that entered into the 7th year. So does that mean that it just started to produce, or does that mean that it was really something already in the 6th year before it made it to the 7th year? And so that's going to be right, and we'll see it. I'll put the cart before the horse, right? What we're going to see is there's a third position about being a third of the way produced, right, by a certain time. It has to be at least a third towards its point of being ripe. If that's the case, then it's considered fully formed enough to get its designation. When does that happen? Does it happen in the year before Shmita? Does it happen on the Shmita year? Does it happen the year after the Shmita year? When does it become a third done? So we're going to have to see which products fit into which one of these three categories. and try to kind of make sense of that mess. And then from there, we'll hopefully be able to build to the broader conversations, which is, right, so what things, right? So is it just fruit? Is it fruit and apparently other things that grow if used in a food-like way, right? So we're gonna have to define that a little bit better as well. The second half of this Gemara starts to introduce that concept to us as well. So I'm going to stop here for any thoughts or questions, but that is kind of step one into this. And again, we'll do a quick review at the beginning of our next class so that you can kind of keep up with where we're holding. And you can tell your friends if they missed the first class, they should not be afraid. They can join us and they will understand as best as we can make them.
Thank
Okay.
you very much. Shkoyach, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Have
Rabbi.
a wonderful night, everybody. And I'm glad to be back. It's good to be back.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Good night.